Welcome back to REYL Talk, everybody. Excited to be here for another amazing episode. We're going to be diving a little bit deeper in this episode about preparation, right? Being prepared in a number of ways. We're going to talk about trafficking. We're going to talk about some powerful subjects, some heavy subjects, but I'm honored to have a distinguished guest with me today that is experienced in life and combat, self-defense, a lot of different disciplines, recognized nationally, internationally, just a phenomenal person. So Patrick Odle, thank you for being here. Thanks for carving out time, dude.
No, it's my pleasure, really.
Excited to connect, man. I know your background, and I'm sure I don't know all of it because it's quite extensive, but I'd love to just kick it off with a very directed question, and then we'll kind of back into some of your backstory from there. But most people see the world getting crazier day by day, which can lead to more paranoia, more anxiety, more stress and worry about it. So how would you counsel somebody that's just trying to exist day to day in the normal stressors of life to try to, from a mental perspective, live more prepared, live more ready?
Well, I think that one way or another, we're going to expel the energy. It's just, it can be that restlessness or anxiety or even like worry to the extent of having a real negative impact. And it obviously it takes energy to be prepared, but I can look at it two ways. I can spend that energy and in the end still not be any closer to my goal, or I can pay it forward and spend that energy in advance. And I kind of look at working out as the same thing because sometimes I might be doing like VIP protection, or I might be teaching faculty and administration how to like combat an active shooter. So my job is very physical. And for me, if I allow myself to atrophy and deteriorate, I'm going to be injured. So the discomfort is going to come one way or another. So I could pay it forward and go to the gym willingly and choose on my terms to engage life head on, or I can be reactive to things. But either way, we're going to expel the energy. I would just rather be at the helm, so to speak, and really be making conscious decisions that are going to cater this life experience for what I'm choosing to do. And that comes to my food, and that comes to my mental preparation. It's like we can spend a ton of energy and stress being reactive to situations that happen, or we can start trying to plan and anticipate and prepare. And I think with those types of approaches, the spirit doesn't like battle so much with the life experience, because I think that when you're just in a reactive state and everything's kind of coming at you from the side and you're constantly feeling unprepared or caught unaware, it could be really discouraging. And I've talked to people that have like a negative life outlook because they're so reactive to things that they don't really feel like they have any aspect of control over their life. And the way I put it is there will always be these wild cards that I don't have any control over: getting ill, accidents, just unpredictable injury. But why not like narrow the exposure in as much of these other avenues as I can? And, one day I'd love to have a family like you do. And to do that, I've got to be able to not just stay healthy and engaged and in tune with my environment, but I've got to be able to provide an example for other people to look to that they would want to experience the same kind of confidence in life. And for me, I deal with people all the time where they say, oh, I would never walk up into somebody's space like that. Or even with officers, when I train them, they say, how do you get so close or get so comfortable being so close with people? And I say, you get desensitized to it by dealing with the discomfort so much. And I think that life is the same way. If you are hiding and trying to duck and dodge difficulty or strain or hardship, then when you face it and you're having to face it reactively, it can seem like so much more than it is. Whereas anthropologically, I feel like we have evolved to be conditioned to endure hardship for growth and for discovery, for self-discovery. So nowadays, in our current day and age, we have so many distractions and we have it so easy that people are actually like, they're resistant to hardship. They don't want to do anything difficult. And I think by just challenging yourself to do something difficult each day, whether it be something that you just don't want to do, it might be an intellectual task, but I think that having that familiarity with opposition or that familiarity with hardship, it builds a different type of constitution within an individual. So,
Mm, I love it.
and we learn this naturally. You do enough martial arts, there's always a guy, up the ladder from you that's handing it down. So, you get that humbling experience enough. It comes with so many small victories that hard work just becomes natural. Before I did all the martial arts stuff, it was wrestling and the work ethic, I think, that gets instilled with these types of things. It really does allow me to be proactive instead of reactive in life and to try to eat better instead of waiting until I'm obese to try to be reactive to that. It allows for me to make better overall decisions when it comes to my sleep and my rest, and also just giving myself some grace when I find that it's hard to stay motivated. So I think that a lot of the folks I'm running into now just don't know where to take the first step. They're so in the negative that their diet is working against them, lack of rest is working against them, their body is starting to betray them, and they don't know how to put one foot in front of the other to take that first step. So a lot of the people I work with, it's in the defense realm, but I also have been doing more and more, as I hate the term really, as more of a generalized life coach, just taking people with me when I go to the gym or taking them with me when I do cold plunge or sauna, or talking to them about the mental health modalities that I use. So, but it's not like I'm running around telling everybody how they should live. They just see me living in a very high stress life choice, but still, being a functional, compatible human being with society. And with that, there's a constant listening to myself that has to take place. And that might mean that, like, I have to say some no's when otherwise, like, my support system would want to have me there. But for me, like, the mental healthy thing for me to do is to stay in, or to not do the social thing. And
It's awesome.
so I've just tried to lead by example and show people some of the stillness that helps me, like the sauna, the cold plunge, even my time in the gym. It doesn't really allow you to think of anything else in the
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah.
And the Chinese refer to that as mushen. It just means no mind. You could do no mind when you're sweeping a floor, or you could do it while you're waxing your car, while you're building something with metal. It's just you're so 100% involved in what you're doing that it gives you a release from all of the day-to-day stress.
Beautiful.
So that's what I've had to find, is a sense of balance in this life. And a lot of the folks that I run into, they're amazing specialists at what they do in life, but they've allowed so many other little things to fall to the wayside in compromise to be a specialist in their
Yeah.
career or in their family
Hmm.
or whatever it is that is their passion, but they've lost themselves along the way. So,
That's some incredible insights to kick this off, Patrick. Thank you. That's got my mind thinking about a few different things, but you're talking mental resilience, physical resilience. I don't know if you know, I spent 6 years working in an oil refinery, and it was ultimately what shut the plant down was an explosion one night when I was working. Super scary time, different story. So this is your stage, not mine, but the reaction that occurred literally from a corrosive pipe, the lack of attention to detail in this specific area, right, ultimately resulted in an entire refinery that produced hundreds of thousands of barrels of crude oil a day shutting down and over 600 people losing their jobs. Like,
yeah, it's catastrophic.
the families that
Catastrophic.
impacts to everything else. So, like, yeah, that you're talking about proactive and reactive has been on my brain since that moment in my 20s. Like, that's something that I've thought about. It is, you're right, it is an intentional choice, and I love that you use some of those words, that intentionality of what you're talking about, to intentionally move into a difficult situation and then come out on the other side, and then that over and over again builds that physical mental resilience that you're talking about. So well said. Thank you so much for that clarity. And I'd love for you to give us a little bit of background just so the guys can have context too into like what your younger life was like, kind of what transitioned you into martial arts, your self-defense, your specialization there. And then also like, how would a guy, right, listening to this, so most of our men, our male audience, toe that line from like, right, the protector without going into driving with fear or the aggressor? Like, how do we kind of toe that balance as well? I'd love some of your insights on those.
Very good. Okay, I'll try to keep those in a way that presents connected. I would say the way that my life started out early on, I had a real rough and tumble upbringing. The way I refer to it is it was more of like a feral kind of free range parenting that took place.
Okay.
I've always had a free spirit and needed to be kind of corralled a bit, and because my father was in law enforcement and he was a security specialist. My mom was kind of got to be a stay-at-home mom for the first 7 or 8 years, and we grew up in Hawaii. So every day I was kind of growing up laying on the ocean and playing and swimming and surfing and all of that stuff till I was about 5. But at about 9 years old, my parents got divorced, and my mom and I had to move where my grandmother was living. And it was a pretty rough area, and it was east of Los Angeles. And it was pretty much known for agriculture, like strawberry fields and the prison that was in that area. So a lot of the kids I grew up with, their family were gang members, their parents were in and out of the lockup facility. There was also a youth facility nearby, so many of the kids I would go to school with were bussed in from like a little youth prison, and they would go to school with us, and then they'd go back and they'd stay at this youth authority. I went from kind of suburbia and not really understanding any of this stuff till, at fourth grade, getting dropped into gang neighborhoods and getting beat
Wild.
up just because I, didn't happen to look like the rest of the other kids in my neighborhood. And I think for some reason they must have thought that I had a better life than they did, whereas I'm kind of going through a broken home and living at my grandma's house in an extra bedroom out of a suitcase. And, so anyhow, I had to learn how to defend myself pretty quick. And luckily, my dad had always wrestled with me, and I was kind of rough and tumble, and I didn't have an aversion to it. So started with boxing and really didn't like it very much. In the Hispanic community, boxing's like a real big part of the community. And so I did that for a little while and just found I wasn't very good at it, especially when these kids had been boxing from like a very young age on up.
Yeah.
So I got into wrestling shortly after that, and I just had a passion for it.
Awesome.
Luckily, after a couple of years, my mom ended up getting into another relationship, and we moved out of that area and to a pretty nice area where I ended up wrestling through junior high and high school and even coaching in college and all of that kind of stuff. But I started out as a competitive wrestler, wrestling what you would call year round.
Okay.
They have like a 9-month season. If you count the 3-month school season, then they run freestyle and Greco, which are the two Olympic styles. So
Okay.
I would go to all the local high level colleges and high level high schools and all the wrestling camps and all of that stuff. And it was just pretty much life. Um, and I had a bunch of friends that were doing all kinds of crazy stuff. And I was kind of navigating through things a little better because I was a high level athlete. So I would get in trouble, but like because I was winning and getting good grades, I would get a lot more leeway. So I kind of was riding the fence quite a bit throughout high school and, just not making the best life decisions. And I ended up tearing my rotator cuff in competition. And that really killed a lot of my chances of going into the military or going to a 4-year college. So I ended up getting some government grants, and basically the school really shifted a lot of things around to get a job for me at the campus and some things if I would come over there and wrestle at a junior college and do some coaching. So I did that for about a year, and I just didn't feel right with school. It felt like I didn't know why I was there. I came to wrestle. I couldn't wrestle anymore, not at the high level. And I just wasn't really sure what to do. So I started just kind of pulling out of full-time school and doing part-time general education courses because I didn't know what I wanted to do. But about 21 years old or so, I started dating a girl and got real heavy into this relationship, and she had a couple kids. And it seemed like for that whole year that we were dating, everything was about spending time with these kids and us doing things on the weekends that were family oriented. And then we went through kind of like a unexpected separation, and we both moved away from each other. And I was sitting here thinking, I have nothing for myself. Like, since wrestling, I can't wrestle anymore. And I just thought, when I was young, I always wanted to learn martial arts. And so at 21 years old, I started going to Kung Fu, of all things,
Awesome.
so it's never too late. I could definitely say that, like, I went to every studio in town and already having at least 500 victories of like wrestling, like I was a heavy wrestler and pretty darn good at it at the end there. So going into all of these studios, I found this one guy that just scared the hell out of me. And I was like, well, if I'm learning to be a tougher guy, I need to learn from somebody that scares me. So I started going to this place and there was kickboxing and jujitsu, and then they had like a kung fu class. I started doing the kung fu, and he just told me, he said, look, man, these martial arts, they're great if you want to learn like about a culture and some tradition and stuff. And 30 years ago, if you knew this and nobody else did, yeah, you'd whoop everybody's butt. But nowadays, you got a lot more guys boxing, doing MMA, doing wrestling, jujitsu. When I was coming up, it was less than 1% of the population had any formal training. Now it's between 3 to 4% of the population has formal training.
Okay.
So with that being said, you have like almost 3 to 4 times more people nowadays can fight versus 20 years ago when I started hitting it hard.
Right.
He would make us go to Kung Fu for our regular curriculum, but if we wanted to progress beyond a certain point, we had to go to jujitsu and we had to go to kickboxing. Because even though they're a sport and they have rules, they're non-compliant whatsoever. From day one in kickboxing or wrestling or jiu-jitsu, nobody's going to let you punch them in the face or take them down or submit them.
Right.
And with kung fu and karate and all the martial arts, they're all taught through compliance. So if you have no non-compliant training whatsoever and you learn a bunch of kung fu in a compliant environment and you think that that's going to work for you in the real world,
Interesting.
there's a disconnect.
Yeah.
But luckily, I had a guy who trained world champion kickboxers, and he also was a master of Kung Fu. And he said, look, it has a place, but if you can't effectively make it work because you don't understand distance and timing and non-compliance, then it's a bunch of theory and you have no application of it. So anyhow, that was kind of my big exposure. I would say go into something where you have the opportunity to try a few things
Okay.
because it's less intimidating. Older people are going to have an aversion to being punched in the face. So you can go into some grappling and start understanding how to close distance and subdue somebody and control them without having to hit them or be hit initially. Once you feel like you have a better control over that, you might open yourself up to an MMA class where they're going to grapple and they'll lightly strike. But you don't have to go to sparring night once a week where people are trying to take each other's head off and they all treat it like the world championships. So getting experience at a fight gym that also taught martial arts, I think really crossed me over because in my world, there's 3 different types of studios. You have martial arts studios, like I discussed, a lot of culture and tradition and authority.
Okay.
Everybody has to bow to the guy with the darkest belt that has the most stripes on it, and we all have to like have this sense of cultural preservation.
Okay.
Great for children, especially. It instills honor and a sense of respect and, gets them involved in a sense of a pecking order where it's a merit-based application. So with that, you have some benefits that translate to fighting, but not a direct translation by any means. Then you have sport, which all of the best stuff in a fight is stuff you can't do in sport. No poking in the eyes, no hitting the windpipe, no striking the groin,
Yeah.
no striking to the back of the head. It's like if we want to neuter actual fighting, that's what sport becomes. So if you get really good at sport, you actually get really good at not effectively hitting the best targets on the body.
Gotcha.
All right. And then you have defense systems, which is kind of more what I specialize in now. Even though I have a history in sport and a history in martial art, I teach defense systems, which are not left to scrutiny or, I guess you would say, opinion. There's a beginning, there's an end. There's one way of doing things. There's no artistic expression involved like martial art. With martial art, the tall person might do it this way, the short person might do it this way. With a defense system, there's one way.
Gotcha.
Okay, so defense systems tend to focus more on getting you a certain skill set in a tight window, and there's no rules. It's about survival. So sticking more with defense systems, the martial arts and the sports can influence that. But I would say if you're nervous about getting into a defense system and that's intimidating, you could start with a martial art or a sport. And if you start to develop like an awareness that you can move certain ways and that you feel safe doing it in this one realm, then you go into a defense system where you can actually learn like a blueprint of like how to get out of bear hugs, headlocks, somebody grabbing your wrist, somebody pointing a weapon at you, so it's going to have this span where there's a beginning and an end, and then it's really just a matter of staying crisp with all of that. I think in Kung Fu, to get my master's degree, I had to learn about 1,400 techniques, and I had to sign off every single one before I get the next one. And with Krav Maga, the whole civilian curriculum is really like 50 techniques, but you learn how to apply them several ways. So it ends up being like 50 that expand out into like 130.
Okay.
You know what I mean? But it's
Yeah.
it's meant to be very little information that has universal application,
Neat.
and it's not to get in the weeds of artistic expression. So Krav Maga, perfect example, Israeli defense system, right? It's like they've stripped away the martial artsy stuff and just focused on the most likely situations that a person would get into, how to get out of them, and some basic combatives to help make that happen. So I would say that really the biggest step is like realizing it's never too late. I have a lady that started with me this year, and she just had her 50th birthday.
Awesome.
But when she started with me, she was going to be turning 50, and she was super nervous. I have another gentleman that started with me at 72 years old, and we started him right with getting a knife out and how to effectively use it. He's not doing this anymore. Guy used to be a bodybuilder, but
Yeah.
now he's 72 years old, and he's got a bad hip and a bad knee on the same side. And, so he's working with what limitations he has, but he's given himself permission to try. He's given himself permission to fail.
Very
And
cool.
I think that that's where people hold back. It's like they feel like, especially once they become good at something, they don't want to go back to being a failure again. That's the hard part psychologically, right? And I can't say how many times I've had to take off my black belt with all the stripes on it and set it over here and put on the white one and walk into this new environment and say, I know nothing. And they're like, but we know who you are. I'm like, it doesn't matter. That doesn't matter here in these circumstances.
Right.
Today, you treat me like I'm a guy walking in for the first time, like everybody else. And you have to be willing to like stay a student. And that's hard in my world because the guys that get good at this stuff tend to be kind of like A-type personalities.
Gotcha.
And so you run into a lot of one-trick ponies, like guys that are really, really good on the gun, but they can't fight their way out of a wet paper bag, or
Hmm.
guys that are really good with the knife, but you get them on the ground, they don't know shit. It's just, it's really unique to like have somebody that works on their weaknesses instead of just trying to further enhance their strength.
Interesting.
So, but
Well, I love.
being humbled by people better than me keeps you that way. Going to jujitsu and getting strangled and knowing damn well if I could get my knife out, I'd be fine. But I have to work in this environment where it challenges me to create new solutions and to think and, to be the low man on the totem pole again. So for me, it was out of necessity. I didn't really have much of a choice. If I didn't learn how to fight better, I was going to come home without my shoes, or I was going to come home without my jacket, or I was going to come home beat up. So I had to learn. But, all in all, I think that it's never too late. I was lucky to get through it with sport. I became tough enough to where they knew they wouldn't get it for free. And my name was on the announcements for wrestling and stuff. So I wasn't really getting picked on. But there was a period where, like, my shoulder, I got out of shape and I started to have my belly stick out further than my chest for the first
Mhm.
time in my life. And I was sitting there going, well, everything's just been about other people for a couple of years now. I need something for me, you know? And I think most men, especially if they're making the sacrifices for a family, it's easy to like forget about themselves in the end of it, you
For
know?
sure.
Even without a family and stuff, I'll have days where I run so hard, I'll get to 8 o'clock at night and I'm like, shoot, I haven't eaten anything. A lot of times we put ourselves last. So, you
We
know,
do. I appreciate that. I love your explanation of everything and the understanding. I think that that provides some pretty cool clarity into a world that I know very little bit about. We want to talk about, kids and family and all the other stuff, right? With 9 kids, I'm like, I could go on forever, but this is your world. You've grown up in it and lived it. So I love your progression through that. And some of the things that stuck out with me the most from what you just shared, the word awareness is one that we key in on a lot. We try to move guys through kind of a flow of awareness, accountability, and then getting them into action. That's one of our big focuses, and specifically on the podcast here, really like mental, emotional, and physical, just health, resilience, all of it. So I would love to know, kind of as we shift gears and talk a little bit more, I'm excited to dig in and talk about some of the heavier work, the harder work that you do now with the Children's International Rescue Foundation. But in a family setting, in an everyday setting, knowing what you know in your defense background and what you've accomplished, like, talk to us about situational awareness, how critical and important that is, and then how that blends and helps you as you move into like rescue missions with kids in some of these darkest and unspeakable situations that you get yourself involved with, like you're talking about, willingly going into these difficult and situations that you've been in before. I'm sure your background has helped quite a bit, and all the things that you've done and fought through and persevered through in life. So that gives us some really good context of the man that shows up now, and this I mean, literally getting to put this cape on and going in and rescuing these kids, and the work that you do. So I'm excited to hear more about it and share that with our audience.
Yeah, I think that what it comes down to is like when I teach women's defense, I've literally observed other people teaching a women's defense course and they're like, just act confident. When you're walking to your car, like, have your keys in your hand and act confident. And it's very difficult, I think, for people to project something they've never experienced. So because I've bounced and because I've done protection details and I've been, to over 25 different countries all around the world, not all of them first world, and I did a lot of traveling alone. I think that when I walk into a place, there's a certain calm that really can't be faked because I don't need to project some kind of a toughness or anything like that because they just see that I'm comfortable in places that most people wouldn't be comfortable. And that alone usually raises an eyebrow around people that know what they're looking at. And growing up in rough neighborhoods and then learning how to fight and learning how to stare somebody in the eyes that is 100% capable of putting you down and then going the distance and effectively winning more than you lose, eventually you start to become comfortable in what you're capable of. And I don't need to throw it around or project it, but when I'm walking down the street and people don't normally see someone that looks like me, it kind of helps. I'm not a small guy. I'm 5'8", but like I'm a couple 100 pounds. So in a lot of these countries, just people aren't as nourished, and calories are a luxury. So I try to make sure that the way I carry myself doesn't come off as a challenge to people or an
Okay.
arrogance. But there's like a quiet confidence that goes with capability. And this is something that I get to discover in training the people that I work with is oftentimes I see them get closer to the person that they want to be. Through the capability that they're developing, I see them able to release a little bit of confidence that wasn't so common when we first met. And it's funny because it's not a cockiness, but it's just you start to see a confidence in their ability and the fact that they know that they could handle themselves.
Very cool.
So I think that translated well for me with the rescue environment because I'm having to go into like these extremely dangerous countries where, they're neighboring countries that are in the middle of revolution, and there are a lot of people that are displaced refugees that are becoming these victims. I think another part of it is that having seen young kids whose older sisters were prostituting, their mothers were like I saw these things growing up. So it wasn't as big of a shock for me to somebody who's never seen this stuff before. There'll never be a time where it'll be tasteful, but it- it's something I don't have to look twice at when I see a girl that obviously is strung out on drugs and she's prostituting herself. And there are many things that we run into on these operations that we're in no position to interact with or stop or intervene of because it'll blow our cover.
Wow.
So there are times where, of course, I would love to be the almighty hand of punishment and judgment in the moment to rebalance the universe, but that's not going to close a case for us. That's not going to bust the people that are really behind this, that are 2-3 degrees of separation from the low-level street worker guy that I'm pulling intel from right now.
Right. Right.
A big part of it is putting my ego aside and realizing it's not my job to punish anyone. It's not my job to judge anyone. I'm there to collect evidence and make sure that these people can never do this to somebody again. And I have to detach from my own wants and needs when it comes to doing that type of work. But also the composure. learning how to be around people that are horrible people and look like you're comfortable being there. This is the stuff that I think really weighs on your soul, that I don't realize how exhausting it is until I get home and I get that first shower in my own shower and I get to crawl in my own bed and I sleep for a day and a half, you know?
Wow.
You're emotionally and physically exhausted after doing these types of operations, but we're able to give these kids a second chance, and it's worth it. If it means that I can negotiate the danger and leave with only the discomfort of having to be there, but it gives these kids a second chance on life, then it's more than worth it. Now,
It's amazing.
I've been fortunate. We've been very successful on my operations, and I haven't had to use violence up until this point, all undercover. I mean, you have to think if we get to that point, effectively, our operation is blown. So the funniest thing about it is, yeah, I'm capable of the physical stuff, but if it gets to that point, I've failed. Do you know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah. There's
So,
that thing makes me think of an old saying, right? It's like the power, right? But then the ability to harness it. I forget there was a saying that went along with that, right? But or the discipline to be able to harness it and know that, only in a
yeah.
certain more extreme situation would that need to be revealed. So,
Well, to touch on the Israeli method again, there are three levels of actual defensive stuff. Like you have your civilian stuff, and then you have law enforcement, which is more detain and arrest, and then you have military, which is usually to end the threat with whatever means possible. Well, the last thing that you learn after the military stuff is the executive protection protocol, and the Israelis have their own full Israeli method for VIP protection. Here we use ABA, American Bodyguarding Association. In other parts of Europe, they use a Lucian method. But when you learn the Israeli method, you start realizing the highest level of defense is 100% avoidance. Like in the movies, the bodyguard's running out the front door shooting his gun with the VIP in tow. And in reality, they're sneaking out the back door while everyone else is confronting the threat at the front door. That's the reality, is that it's all avoidance at the highest level. It sounds kind of sexy. I had to learn all these martial arts and all of these skills to get in the field. But ideally in the field, I don't want to use anything I've ever learned except for my surveillance and counter surveillance and
yeah.
my evidence collection techniques.
Interesting. Yeah.
So, but I would have never gotten the opportunity if they didn't know I could handle myself, right?
Sure. In
So,
a situation like that. Well, what's the state of the world? Where are we right now? What don't people realize with child human trafficking? And what are some red flags, behavioral tendencies that we should kind of keep an eye out for our families physically, online? Like what do we look for? How do we stay safe and what's going on?
the armor that will protect your children from predatory aggressors is going to be confidence. Like hands down, your children knowing that they're beautiful, knowing that they're loved, knowing that they're smart. The more confidence that your child has, the less that the techniques of the predator will work to seduce them. Because that's what's happening is these guys are getting on social media, they're getting on gaming platforms, they're connecting through other kids that they know, but they're seducing them. That's what they do, is they convince them that they see how much smarter they are than the other kids, or how much more beautiful they are than the other kids, or that they see something different in them. They fill a void that's not being filled by the family unit. And I'm telling you, consistently, that's what happens, is that the family, for some reason, disenfranchises the child, whether it's because they're getting sexual too early, or they're not emulating the values of the family, or they're getting involved in controlled substances. Now, I'm telling you this because this is the number one thing that you could do as a family unit to prevent them falling mesmerized to the seduction of these traffickers, because that's what they do. They look for somebody that has a void and they fill it with whatever the child needs to hear. Now, the other thing I would touch on based off of your line of questioning, because there's like a couple parts to this, is that I primarily work in Central and South America and Africa because the governments will actually work with us on this stuff. Here, they don't want to acknowledge there's a problem. And in the state of Utah, for rapes, sexual assaults, and molestations, there's combined less than 1% conviction rate. I go to things for satanic ritual abuse protests for those. I go to for different like religious backgrounds here in the state where they're petitioning against certain religious leaders that are known to be conducting predatory acts with children. So I'm involved in all kinds of stuff here in the state, and I'm just telling you that less than 1% of the allegations are prosecuted. Prosecuted, not even convicted, prosecuted.
Wow.
So they're so quick to throw things out here that we have more sexual assaults here that go uninvestigated, I believe, than any other state in the United States. So if you think this isn't happening because we're in Utah, you're wrong. And and these statistics are a little older, so I imagine it's gone up instead of down. And this is pre-migration. Pre-migration, we had 10,000 citizens per month in the United States going missing. You divide that by 50, that's approximately 200 kids per state. But it's not laid out like that because you have California where it's got two ports. You have San Francisco and Long Beach, and then you also have a southern border. So it might be as much as triple in California and
Mm.
then lower in some of these other states like Wyoming and then these are also not reported with the reservations because the reservations have their own statistics and their own legalities. So I'm just saying of actual citizens that are non-reservation, we have approximately 200 children per state going missing per month. And it sounds like a lot, but that's like what, 6 a day, 6.5 a day, something like that, of kids that stick their thumb out on the 15 freeway and go north or go south, and they're out of the state. They're gone. They're missing. So when you think about that, we have about 50% of rescues, they recycle back into being trafficked again. I've seen cases where girls that have finally been rescued had to be rescued from the same trafficker on the upwards of 6 times. So there are organizations that are so patient that if these kids keep saying that they want help or they will work with them, they will get them away, rehouse them, relocate them, and they will keep getting reabducted by the trafficker again, either because they tell them where they are or they run back to them or they have a data breach. But I'm just telling you, like here, it's so incredibly difficult because we have no help from law enforcement whatsoever.
Mm.
And in many states, you could be seen as interfering with law enforcement or as some other form of perpetrator. So I
That just
work,
puts the antenna up, right? Why would you not be willing to chase it and work with it for such a difficult, dark thing unless you are the one perpetuating it?
well, and what it is it really like think of the number one industry of all of Utah, besides plastic surgery, of course, right? The number one injury or industry here in the state of Utah is going to be tourism. Because you have Park City, you have Sundance, you have the Olympic Center, you have Moabs, Zion. You know what I mean? So it's not a real good look on all of our national parks if we have to admit that X amount of children are going missing here in the land of, what they think is, you know,
Happy Valley, yeah.
milk and honey, right? I mean, and that's the thing is like it's not a good look, but we can't acknowledge a problem or we can't fix a problem without first acknowledging it.
Yep.
So,
There's
the sad
awareness, yeah.
part is they're not even willing to acknowledge the problem here. And I have families that contact me all the time. And all I can do is like direct them to the appropriate legal channels that are just going to cold shoulder them and snuff them. And if they're not willing to hire a private investigator or give somebody guardianship rights, the first gentleman I trained with, that's what he does, is he trains people to recover children for families. And he has you go to a notary with a family and sign over temporary guardianship rights. So now I'm like the father looking for my kid. I have all
Gotcha.
the rights of a family, not as a private investigator. So I don't know if you know this or not, but if your kid runs away and you know where they're at, you don't need a warrant. Did you know that? Law enforcement needs a warrant, but warrants are for law enforcement. If I know my kid's in that house, I can go and retrieve my child. There's gray areas to all of this that if you
Yeah,
don't know it, and
yeah.
I've talked to cops about this and they're like, technically you're right, but if you kick that door open and the kid's not in there, you just created a home invasion. I said, "Oh, I know. I know the adverse side of it too, but the thing is if I do my work and I know the kid's in there, well, I got a right to retrieve them." So there are different methods for doing this here, but you're not going to have law enforcement supporting you. They're not going to kick the door. They don't care what you've observed, what you've videoed, whatever. Unless they have a warrant, they're helpless. So the way our judicial system is set up here is that if a child isn't willing to go on the stands and be cross-examined by a defense attorney that's willing to represent rapists for a living, and have this child's character be drawn into question, and their sobriety be drawn into question, and their mental state be drawn into question, and completely re-traumatize this child all over again, you're not going to even get a conviction. So these predators are back out on the street 72 hours later because the children won't testify because they know they're going to walk free. And they threaten their families. They'll threaten their siblings, their parents, every other thing. So here, our hands are tied. And most of the guys I work with, they're police officers. Like when I go out of the country and I go to do this stuff, it's like a lot of my guys, they're patrolmen here or sergeants or, or they were law enforcement, but they know that here we're limited. When I arrive there, I have military intelligence guys from their military that pick me up, take me to juvenile justice, to my contact. We meet with the attorney general of the country, and then we meet with the prosecutor of the region, and everybody is shaking our hands and thanking us for coming in there to help them fix their problem. But I got to get on a plane for 16 hours to get that kind of treatment because they won't even do it for us here in this country.
That's insane.
I know, bro. Because we know each other on a
Yeah.
personal basis. Like to make a difference. Like if you could see my skin right now, it's all prickly because it pisses me off. It's like,
Yeah.
you know, they don't want us fixing the problem here because we
Right.
have to acknowledge it exists.
Yep.
But I call up my contacts and they collect me with open arms, and they're so happy to have us there, willing to bring our first world strategies and electronics and techniques to teach them how to fix their problem because they actually give a shit about their kids. I know, bro. So if you aren't protecting them from this seduction, your government isn't going to do it. Once again, prevention, taking initiative versus reaction. And this is the stuff that I'm talking about. It's like, it's not just about you. Like you as a man, unless you like go out into nightclubs and stuff, like you can pretty well limit your exposure. But the moment you become a family man, you got exposure times 10, you know? And it's like you have to be that protector for them. You have to make sure they all know how to see this type of malbehavior themselves. And it's crazy because I've had instances where I'll be out at like a movie theater, right? And I get my trash and I pick it up and we go to leave as we're going out, and I throw my stuff in the trash, and my date wants to go to use the restroom. And I see a parent go in the restroom and leave their kid standing outside the restroom. And the kid was, opposite sex. So I get it. He didn't want to bring his like 10-year-old little girl into the bathroom with him. But he goes into the bathroom and leaves this little girl standing outside here. And while I'm standing there, I'm just kind of watching, and I'm just, just being part of my community, like if somebody would have came up and started harassing that little girl, I'd have been on it so goddamn fast. It would be incredible. Right.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I'm just observing because I feel like it takes a village for us to protect our children. And the girl that I'm seeing, she comes back out of the bathroom and she's like, "Okay, I'm ready." And I was like, "Hold on, we're just gonna hang out here for a second." And so we wait, and the dad comes out and he grabs the little girl, and then they walk off. And I was like, "Okay, let's go." And I didn't say anything to her, but she kind of puts two and two together, and she's like, "What was that about?" And I just explained to her, this dad just went in, but he left this kid, and the kid's just a little young in my mind to be just left alone when a bunch of
Yep.
people are flooding out of a theater, and
Yep.
all somebody's got to do is just grab her by her hand, and if she freezes up and doesn't say it, like 50-50, So she's just like, "Do you normally do that?" And I said, "Well, I just try to be aware. If it's 2 minutes out of my day to maybe make a difference in somebody else's life, or just to stop and just make sure that this person's okay." Like, I feel like the more tuned into your environment, the more prepared you are. So, as far as the trafficking stuff, I know that's a long winded answer, but that's how you protect your children, is by keeping their confidence up to where somebody tells them how beautiful they are. They're like, "I know I'm beautiful." My dad tells me that all the time. Like, I know I'm smart. Like,
Yep.
I get straight A's. Like, it just has no recourse. Right. And then, gosh, the other aspect of your question, how did you word that one more time? You had,
The first part, we're just kind of the state of the world that we're in right now, like with child and human trafficking. Like where is it? I think you addressed that, and we talked about the state. So it's
Yeah,
heavy, it's sobering. I love the advice to parents, I love the advice to
I
families. It's
remember. I'm
yeah,
sorry to interrupt.
go
The
for it.
point that I was going to say is because I was raised by a private investigator for a father, we would walk into a restaurant and he'd ask me, like, in the parking lot, did you see any out of state license plates? Or, what kind of cars were they? So I got to where I could like headlight patterns, taillight patterns, I could identify. I could identify most license plates at a glance before now every state has like 6 or 8 license plates, right? But as a kid, I could identify license plates, I could identify makes and models. He would ask me like to sit down at the table and look him in the eyes and ask me like, there's 2 people in the restaurant that have hats on. What kind of hats are they and where are they sitting? So, like, I would always have these awareness challenges that I would have with my dad that would tune me into my environment preemptively because sometimes we'd sit down and he's like, so what do you want to eat? And there would be no quiz.
Yeah,
But at the same time, I was just tuned into my environment and we would play versions of like Slug Bug, but it might be like Dodge Caravans or it might be, Toyota Pathfinders or whatever. But we would play the same type of games, but you're learning to like engage in pattern recognition. And now I offer a program for women and children called ARC, AARC. And it's awareness, avoidance, respond, communicate. And the reason why awareness is so important is because 75% of your potential violent altercations in life could just be outright avoided if you had proper awareness and you were cued into your environment. You would see these cues that wouldn't leave you susceptible to being caught off guard. Now, statistically, you're going to have 25% of those altercations where you specifically are being targeted, either something you didn't mean to do or something that this person is just specifically targeting you for. And that's where the responses come into play, the actual tactics and the techniques and stuff to fight.
yep,
But every bit as important as being able to survive that violent altercation is your post-event communication. And that's how to talk to law enforcement, how to be cooperative to a point where you don't end up in handcuffs, but not to a point where you say things that are self-incriminating. So really understanding what we call the pillars of self-defense here in the United States. In some states, you're expected to have 5 pillars of self-defense, and every one of those things needs to be upheld for you to have a position of self-defense in a court of law. And here, because we have stand your ground, we're not required to disengage, which is one of those pillars of self-defense. I can't exacerbate, I can't like swear back, but I do have a right to stand my ground here. Whereas in some states, if you don't try to leave the environment, you can't even claim self-defense.
wow,
So many of our states that are more your blue states, you are required to say, you know what? Obviously, you're upset. I've tried to calm you down. I'm just going to leave. And if they block your path or they won't let you leave safely, then now, finally, you have a right to respond. So I'm just letting you know, understanding these pillars of self-defense can help you a lot, especially if you travel frequently,
yep,
because though we live here in the land of stand your ground and castle doctrine, you may go on vacation to a place that doesn't. So understanding how that comes in, and then your awareness and avoidance. I can say most likely avoidance with men has to do directly with ego and pride. When I teach women, they have no problem with avoiding a conflict in most cases, especially if they're coming to me to learn to defend themselves. But with men, a lot of times the ego gets engaged, like the stand your ground thing. Even though it's not required of me here to disengage, I will do it
right,
because it looks great on the police report if I have to get violent. And even though it's not required, I can even use that as another insulating factor between their aggression and my final actions, right? And if I say, look, I don't want any trouble, I take a step back, I create space, they close it, I put my hand out. Now I've physically done something that's non-lethal just to try to de-escalate. And then if I try to leave the environment, it's like I might have 4 or 5 things that I do that insulate me
right,
from the actual violence when it occurs, if it occurs, right? So, I teach people these concepts so that they understand how to negotiate that interaction. And really, like, if somebody comes up and they get aggressive because I don't want to give them money at the gas station pump or something, but they end up eventually walking away because I use these tools, to me, that like still goes in the victory column, like I don't want to have to hurt people to equate what success is in an altercation. And I think that the sooner people can change their mind about what victory is in a conflict or what victory is in an altercation, and it's easy to romanticize. Yeah, this guy came at me and I didn't want to give him money, and then he got aggressive with me and I defended myself. And it's like, no, I can just give this person a little bit of grace as much as I can until I feel physically threatened, and avoid conflict physically at all costs. And I think really that's what you learn with defense when you do martial arts and you sport fight and you do all these things, is that the more familiar you are with violence, the less you want to have to be on the delivering end of it. It's just there's no way that this turns out good for anybody in the end. So, I think that those different things really help me a lot because my awareness is so in tune that when I'm in these environments, I'm kind of in my no mind
Yep.
because I can't think about what's going on at home. I
Yeah.
can't think about like my manuals that I'm writing for my defense system, or, my stepdad and his surgeries right now, or whatever's going on in my life. To focus on any of that, I leave myself vulnerable. I have to be tuned into my environment. And I think that having that mindset where you can shake hands with your opponent and there could be 1,000 people in that auditorium and you don't see or hear any of it, and you're focused 100% on your objective, all of that makes it to where I can walk into these situations and seem like I belong and not get in my own head. Not too much, at least. But it's hard, man. It'll break your heart seeing what these kids are going through. The youngest kids we arrested, or that we rescued this last year, we arrested 34 guys, 34 traffickers, men and women, and we saved 32 kids. Youngest was 11. And at one point, one of the minors that we rescued had an infant that was living in the same brothel that she was working in. This last case that we went and were able to wrap up, there was a young girl that was 14, and she literally, one of my fellow operators, when he got to the place where she was at, and we video record all of these interactions with hidden cameras so that we can get them to open up about where they're from and how old they are and how they tricked them into getting here. Oftentimes they're responding to an ad for a job, and then they're having their ID taken, and then they're being raped and then prostituted out on the street against their will. So all of these things happening basically put it directly to the prosecutors and our contacts so that they can see firsthand that these children were tricked, that they were basically bamboozled into this, and that they were so far in before they knew what happened. They had no means to get out. So he comes up into this young girl's room and he's got his camera ready, and he comes in and she's changing her baby on the bed that she sees clients on, and takes the baby and puts it in the closet in a little bassinet and shuts the door, thinking that she's going to service my fellow operator who's the new client. And luckily, as soon as he saw the baby, it's like perfect excuse to not follow through, because that's what we all have to have the minute we get up there, is an excuse of why we're not going to do this thing that they're expecting us to do.
Right.
And he just saw the baby and he was like, oh my gosh, I have a newborn baby at home. I'm sorry, I'll still pay you. I just don't, you know, like, how old is your baby? Like, are you from this country? Like, where are you from? And she's so grateful that she's getting paid anyway, and she doesn't have to be raped by this guy. It'll break your heart. I come back here and I knew it would feel good to like help kids, right? But when I come back here, I find myself just stopping at a stop sign and like looking at the mountains and just feeling so goddamn grateful for like the life that we get to live here, and how blessed we are that this is our reality versus like what some of these kids know, you
Yeah.
know? And I had like a little bit of a rough upbringing, but nothing compared to the stuff that like we rub up against. So it's really changed my life perspective, and it's given me a sense of gratitude that I never could have anticipated. Anytime I start to get a little spoiled, I think it like puts things back into perspective for me. And as sad as it seems, like I yearn to be doing that kind of work. I feel like it's the greatest sense of purpose I could have in this lifetime. And it's so hard for us to do because everything is just in time on our budget. And like I would go out 2 or 3 times a month and spend the rest of the time going to therapy and, doing whatever I have to do to restore balance to my psyche and my spirit. but at the same time, like, we just don't have the resources. Like, we're lucky to do like 3 or 4 operations a year and
Hmm.
we have a great success rate, but it's difficult because one operation might be like 35 to $1,000. We might have to go out 3 times before it's resolved, and we have to have aftercare resources in play for these children to be relocated and given substance abuse therapy and occupational training, and so they actually have a chance at a life. And even then, half of them end up back in that world in one way or another because it's all they know, and they already see themselves as broken or not good enough. But
You're a
the
special,
success
special
stories,
man, dude.
the success stories make it all worth it, to hear about these girls that got out of it. It's hard, man. It's hard because I have to come back here and act like this is reality, right? When there's a scale to it. And like I'm also aware of this radical side of it, but I have to act like this other radical side of it is normal. And somewhere in the middle is the truth, right? So it's difficult, but there's no like putting the toothpaste back in the tube or unringing the bell at this point. I can never go back to just acting like this isn't happening. And I just know that there's like a life to this kind of work. And that's where I think that it makes kind of a nice segue into the healing side of it and doing the work, like the spiritual and the emotional work. Because fortunately, one of my really good friends is a gentleman. His name's Jeff Kirkham, and he's a Green Beret that's really, really well known here in the Special Forces community. And he has a retreat that he helped found called Mustang Medicine. And because I trust this guy and I have a relationship with him and his life experiences are similar to some of mine. He worked in DEA and he was a Green Beret for 25 years. And so he really recommended that I open up my mind to go into one of these mental health retreats and learning to develop tools to like give myself some more grace and the people around me and just learn to communicate better as a person who's experienced trauma or with people who have experienced trauma. So it's worked both ways. And then, going to that opened up my mind enough to where I was willing to consider seeing a therapist. And it's funny because I probably would have just like bottled up my own BS for the rest of my life if I could have. But the moment I got involved in helping kids, it's like their burden and my burden was
Mm.
getting to be too much to carry. So I needed to like clean out the closets. There was nowhere else to put a new skeleton anymore. And I can't say enough good things about it. I've spent like almost the last 2 years just working on my mental health and learning to process different and learning to accept things that I had never been able to accept about myself and really rewrite my story
Love
and
that.
see it as a blessing and as like a success story because y- I could have just as easily like been one of my friends that didn't make it this far, and I was very fortunate to have the experiences that I had. It felt like a lot of the things that I'd experienced happened to me. And then once I learned to process it, it's like they were going to happen to somebody. I just happened to be the guy that was there at the time. But I got the benefit of the life experience from it.
Right.
So that was a big part of it is really realizing that if I'm going to keep doing this kind of work, that I need to create a pressure valve, like, and build a sense of community. You had mentioned something about acceptance. And I think that the more acceptance that I can have of myself, the more vulnerable I'll be able to be, and that vulnerability is what's going to allow me to be authentic. It's helped me to build a community around me that shares the same values.
Love that.
So I feel very blessed. I'm surrounded by people that are totally supportive of my mission. And sometimes I don't even know how I'm going to do the next thing. I just start putting my momentum into it. And the brick lands beneath my feet just in time. So I know that as long as I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do, it'll keep being successful. And I'll just keep giving of myself, like these talks and these podcasts. Normally, when I do they want to know my martial arts background and all the training and all of that. But I've been using more of my platform to try to bring attention to our cause. And
Sure.
I feel like we're just one benefactor away from being able to do this work full time,
Awesome.
and I've got a bunch of guys that are my fellow guys, and a lot of them are looking at retirement soon, or, pretty soon they're going to be able to direct more time to this, or, if there was actually a way for us to make it all make sense, it's hard because these guys, they get 2 weeks of vacation and 2 weeks of sick time.
Wow.
And if they're spending half of that on operations, they got families too. So it'd be nice to see this make sense to where we could save more people.
Absolutely. So tell us that to wrap up here. That'd be a great way to close us out. Is one, thanks for everything that you do because that is hard. It is heavy, and most people never have to face that kind of darkness or heaviness in their life. People have loss. We have job loss. We have different things and illnesses, and everybody has their battles and their mountains that they climb. But that is, I feel like, an underworld that most people never see, realize, and that you can tell just when you talk about it, the feelings you get. And I know our audience will resonate with your counsel for protecting them and their own family to right. The first thing is keeping them avoided and out of it and out of the situations, but also their just God bless you for the work you do and the man that you are to be able to keep choosing into that, and that there's people that do that, your fellow operators and stuff. So bless your missions. But please tell us for people that resonate with it, and we'll put the link in the show notes and everything for the foundation. But tell us, what can people do? How do we stay connected, get connected, donate, help out?
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. We do have a full, Children's International Rescue Foundation URL, but that's so easy to misspell. The easiest way to find us is the CIRF.org, the CIRF.org, the Children's International Rescue Foundation is what it stands for. And on there, you will see a tab if you would like to donate. We have it set up to where if somebody just wanted to give something small and have a reoccurring monthly subscription donation, they can do that. They can also do a one-time donation as well. And I always encourage people when thinking about donating to an organization, there are significant amount of sites nowadays. One I refer people to is called Give Freely, and it's just a website that evaluates C3s to make sure that they're maintaining their mission and that they're doing what they say they're doing with the resources. And you'll see that none of our board of directors draws a salary. Sometimes, and I say that quite sparingly, like we provide an operator fee for our field operators that go out that are out in the field for 10 days at a time or something like that. But none of our board of directors is drawing a salary. You're not going to see any inflated, self-patting backs here where people are bringing in money under the guise of helping children and then lining their own bank accounts. We all donate our time, and we do this because it's the right thing to do. And if more countries were doing this for themselves, we wouldn't have to do this internationally. But fortunately, what you'll find with Give Freely is we're 100% transparent as a 501c3. And you may find that you have an organization you've been giving to for some time, and they might not have been fully transparent. So, we encourage people to do their homework, and you'll see that the money that we raise goes towards these children. So,
Awesome.
I would say that's the biggest thing that we could really advocate for. We do have some merchandise on there for some of that goes to help. We have, little hats and shirts and things that you could purchase if you wanted to support us or stimulate conversation about this movement of protecting children. But, I would say that's really the big one is we survive off of these donations. And luckily, our individual networks are very supportive of us, but we have to start getting our name out there. With most of my guys being law enforcement or first responders, they're very nervous to put themselves on camera like I will.
Sure.
But, I just, if we don't start getting in funds, it's going to be very difficult to sustain our plan.
Right. Well, thank you. Yeah, we'll do our part. Happy to help.
I
Amazing,
appreciate the
Patrick.
support. You
Great
know,
conversation, man. Thank you for the character you're building, the accomplishments that you're checking these boxes, and the mental health, your own spiritual mental health journey that is critical for guys. I'm so glad we touched on that. And you mentioned that it's, I would imagine, even can be even more challenging for, right, the tough guy. It's hard for all men, but I think even more, right, when you have this machismo when you have the credentials and the decorated, right, accomplishments. It can be even tougher to hang some of that up and stay humble and stay teachable and coachable like you are. So thanks for being a friend, and thanks for taking time.
No, it's an honor. Thank you. I had one of those dads that was always like, walk it off, rub some dirt on it, you know? So it's been a process to crack myself open and start reworking some things. But I've noticed already that it inspires some of the stronger guys around me to do the same. So if my discomfort can inspire other people, then even better.
That I've heard a little saying recently that the cracks are how the light gets in. So yeah, they're not always bad. So thank you, brother. We'll
My
connect
pleasure.
again soon, I'm sure, off camera. And thank you so much for the work you do and the person you are.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right, be well.
Take care.